Hello and welcome. Oh, okay. Hello and welcome to a very special edition of MLQ Replay. I'm Ethan Sturman. It is championship week here in Major League Quidditch. Myself, Nick Jablonski, Jack McGovern are here to break it all down. And joining us in a little while, Obi, assistant coach of the Minneapolis Monarchs, to make the decision that will set the final state of the bracket and give us all of our matchups to talk about. But first, we're going to talk about the end of our regular season. We had our very last game. It was a very short game three completion between the Washington Admirals and the Boston Forge with an absolute ton to play for. Winner would avoid being the 3 seed and having to play in the play-in bracket. And Boston, if they were to win, which they did, would become division champions. Boston did it in quite dominating style. Nick, if you had to pick one thing, what was the difference maker in this very brief game to about 4 or 5 goals? Yeah, the pair did not lose bludger control for the entirety of their shift, which, as Nick said, lasted about 10-minute real time, probably not quite 10-minute game time. It was a 3-0 run that put Boston within 1 goal and left Washington 5 goals away. With them out, it was a quick 2-0 run for Washington, then Max Havlin subbed back in. I don't believe Serena ever did sub back in. Oh, she did for the final goal. Jack, what else about Boston did you take as a good sign going to championships?
Beaters, chasers, they were flying out to the right spots at the right times and making life really difficult for the Washington offense. Everything was beginning on the defensive end for the Forge. And if they can stick to the formula that they were showing against the Admirals, a short 10-minute stint that they had been preparing for the past couple weeks, if they can bring that same type of preparation for every match, at MLQ Championship, they are going to be really hard to beat.
Yeah. Nick, on the Washington side, I mean, obviously, one of the problems they're always going to face coming into this is that, on kind of the A1 level of beating, they can't match 1-to-1 with Boston. And that was proven out in this play. But what do you think they could have done a little bit more to at least try to stem some of that bleeding, maybe stay a little closer, maybe finally get Havlin and Montero out of the game and then pounce?
Any form of motion on the offensive side would have been really helpful, I think. I think the fact that they were all kind of standing very stagnant on the offensive half of the ball definitely hurt their chances because it meant that the Havlin-Montero pair didn't have to account for any off-ball cuts, any motion in their game. They realized that they were staying wide, they were staying far away from them, and that gave them so much time to fly out to these dangerous spaces, to pressure the ball and to force issues. And also, if you're moving off ball, it allows your beaters to work because the other beaters have to keep track of so much more than what's going on right now. And Montero and Havlin at this point, if you're standing in a diamond formation around them and not moving at all, that's a piece of cake for them at this point. They are both so solid at understanding where they need to be when no one is moving.
Yeah, I think kind of the crown jewel of this lack of willingness to go or willingness to force it all in a way that would draw out the beaters was a play. It was pretty early in the game. I would say maybe 4 or 5 possessions in. The Washington had gotten moved a bit more into a square, I think just by on the ground motion of the quaffle. The ball got moved behind in the square. Harry Greenhouse, who was the only quaffle player playing off hoops in what was a hoop zone from Boston at the time, stepped all the way out, almost to the out of bounds line where that player was. The ball was moved over to John Sheridan, who was now unmarked. At that moment, Serena Montero felt that she was a little bit too far from her hoops behind and actually turned away from Sheridan and ran back to her hoops and actually considered taking an engage with, I want to say it was Diana Howard at the time, but I could be wrong. At that point, John Sheridan did not move forward, did not take one step forward. There was not a defensive player within 25 feet of him. And the thing is, yes, you can hound the individual, but it seemed like it was a concerted stylistic choice by Washington for how they wanted to play in this game, because this was not the only instance of this. It was just a really great instance of it. Jack, what else might have concerned you a bit about Washington?
Yeah, I think the beaters on offense were a little too aggressive, given the situation and given the momentum that Boston captured really from the first goal. I think they needed to step back a little sooner and play more conservatively on offense, and try to do their best with one bludger. We've seen teams play effectively with one bludger, and it's not ideal ever, but you can't sell out for bludger control when the other team is 2, 3, 4 goals away from winning the game. You have to adjust your plan a little bit, especially with how well Havlin and Montero were playing.
Nick, going forward, looking at championships, obviously a quick turnaround from these teams. What would you like to see Washington doing a little differently come next week?
First things first is, how many teams are they going to play that are going to have the beater pair of Havlin Montero? I think heading into championships, we're not going to see many of them, if any at all, right, that are going to match at that tier. And when Boston went to their second beater line in this, Washington, quote unquote, took their lunch money for 2 straight, 3 straight possessions in that scenario and just basically bullied them off the field. And so I would expect Washington to look much sharper and play much more aggressively against a pair not of the caliber of Havlin and Montero in this situation. We saw a lot of that off-ball magic that we saw last year for Washington. And I think the fact is that if they can move off ball a little bit more, force the other team to respect their cutters a lot more, it's going to buy more time for this beating core to play the way they want to. We know that Bernie Burgess wants to play aggressively. He wants to throw those hard engage beats right off the bat. And when he gets a chance to do that, he's deadly with it. He plays very, very well against pairs that don't know how to capitalize on that attack formation. And so I would expect to see them sort of change what's going on, just by the virtue of them not playing these top beater pairs every time. And they'll get a chance to warm up and play through the play-in bracket to get to that before they see maybe one of the better beating cores in the league in Austin, potentially.
Yeah, almost an impossibility. I shouldn't say almost impossibility, that they would see Boston anything short of the finals. If they were to make it out of the play-in bracket, they're like 95% odds that they would be on the opposite side of the bracket. There's one corner case, which is Charlotte winning the top half of the play-in bracket and Washington winning the bottom half of the play-in bracket. It's the only way they end up on Boston's side of the bracket. But other than that, they are very, very likely to be playing Austin in a quarterfinal if it were to come to that. Jack, on the Boston side of the ball, anything that concerned you from this weekend in what was a pretty comprehensive win overall?
Not really. Nick alluded to transition opportunities, some misses, around the hoops, just lack of ability to connect on the fast break. I think they'll sort those out. I think they've been a good transition team all season. I think they're looking really good heading into championship weekend, but I know Nick has something to say.
Nick, you want to disagree with Jack?
I mean, we talked about it. Physicality is still a missing piece for this Boston team, I think. I mean, Tyler Trudeau was able to get to the hoops multiple times pretty freely on drives. And of course, Tyler is one of the no bludger artists of the past 10 years, realistically, at this point. But that's still something that has to happen. There's multiple times where 3 players fall off of the offensive driving player. And I think that that's part of the issue. I think that can be changed and adjusted. We haven't seen Chris Labuddy for a while. He is on the 25 for the coming weekend and is a physical force to be reckoned with, honestly, and could change up that situation. But a lot of their sort of off-ball threats, right, the Steinbergs, the Doyles, are not necessarily known for their physicality on the defensive end of the court. And I think that might be a trade-off they might have to figure out, is sort of how they're going to play these physical defensive stands with some of their more mobile off-ball threats on the offensive side.
Yeah, and Also Ryan Fenning not at the series, another physical player. Taylor Crawford only played minimal minutes, another physical player for this team. Really, I mean, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. In a lot of ways, this entire thing, tournament's broken so well for Boston, in the way that San Antonio being on their side, news coming out that Miguel Esparza is not going to be on the roster. Austin's on the far side. Washington will be on the far side. New York will be on the far side. This is a team positioned, I think, very, very well to potentially compete and win a championship, which I think we had real questions about coming into the season, and now as we're sitting here, in no small part back on the back of this win, because if they lost on Saturday, I think we would be singing a completely different tune about their chances to win championship. That is how narrow the margins have been in this MLQ season. But enough of that series. Let's start focusing on championships, and let's start focusing on the final state of the bracket. So for that, we're going to bring in assistant coach of the Minneapolis Monarchs, Obi. Obi, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Yep, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So before we get to the decision, I just want to kind of talk a little bit about your mindset as a team. Obviously, a year ago, Minneapolis was also in this exact same position, with San Antonio as an option, not with New York as an option as it is this year, but with Boston as your other option. The team ends up choosing Boston. The series definitely doesn't go your way. How much if any, did the history of what happened last year play into any decision-making you're doing this year?
Yeah, I think a lot of the decision-making we did this year was based on what we felt was the best matchup for us. Looking at, East and South teams, we felt that they're both really good teams to choose from, but what we've been doing all year, kind of like building up to this moment, kind of watching games on our own part, doing our own scouting, we just felt that, this ultimately last year was a good opportunity for us to kind of see a different pace than what we usually see in the Midwest North Division. But now it was really about like taking advantage of that experience and taking advantage of everything we built up this season, and hopefully putting a good product at championships this weekend.
You guys haven't lost a North Division series since before COVID, but you've also still looking for your first ever win at MLQ championships. So mindset-wise, mentality-wise, for your team, what is it difficult at all to get over the mental hump of going back to championships, knowing that it's been a struggle for you guys the last couple of times?
I think it's something that players and coaches have thought about, but I don't think it's something that's been a monkey on our back. I think we know we can play good Quidditch. I think we know we can play with anybody who we go against. It's just about mindset going into it and making sure that we're following everything that we're teaching in practice. This whole season's about, Cody loves saying raising our floor. The biggest thing that the new coaching staff that we had this year was about raising our ceiling. And so just about mindset and kind of a confidence going into certain matchups and certain games. And hopefully we are able to kind of change what we've been doing.
Obviously, we've had Cody on a couple times, and we're not one to press people about their own ability, but we've talked some about how Cody does seem like he's taken a step this year. As someone who's coached with him, as someone who's played with him, what have you seen from his performances on the field?
I think it's just confidence. I think it's just like I said, we've come into the season trying to not just raise our floor, raise our ceilings. So I think it's about doing calculated risks. I think Cody's always had the ability as a beater to make long range beats, to make quick decisions, to kind of play both sides of the ball effectively, as good as a lot of other beaters that get more exposure. I think it's really just about instilling that confidence in each one of our players, and Cody's one of them that, as a player, has kind of taken that confidence and has really jumped up a few notches. But I think we've all seen it before in practice and everything like that. It's just about putting it in games.
So undefeated regular season and North Division champions. I believe it's the first undefeated season ever in the North Division. There were a lot of question marks about you guys, coming into the season, even on this show. What did it mean for you guys to kind of get back to the top of your division?
I think we all knew that there were question marks. I think there's still question marks to a certain extent. But I think we all kind of knew that we had the overall roster to kind of compete with anybody in the North Division. We just needed to make sure that we went into every series and kind of did what we were doing in practice and showed our ability every single time out. There were some times where we questioned, in games where we fell behind or we weren't executing the way we wanted to. but we have leaders all across the board of our team who, aren't afraid to call anybody out or say what we need to do to change things. So we did a really good job this season of just staying the course and not getting flustered and not, freaking out about anything. So I think we have, again, built a good product to bring this weekend.
You mentioned a new coaching staff, and then in that last answer, you mentioned some of those leaders across the board. Obviously, some of your biggest leaders do get credit and shout outs, but who are some of the more unsung leaders on the team you think are worth mentioning?
Yeah, you had Emma Persons on here earlier this season, and she's obviously a younger player, but someone who's very vocal about like what we expect and what we want to do as a team. Terry Carlson doesn't get a lot of praise, but he's a two-way player that is just phenomenal. He can facilitate, he can score the ball, he can defend like a crazy animal. It's just across the board we're great. And then Nicole Nelson's been a stalwart, beating wise, and having Ben come over from the South has been a big help as well. So Nathan Podolsky is one of the smartest dudes I know, and he watches so much film. That's only a few names, but like everyone on this team is always giving a little bit extra effort, either that be workouts or that be watching film, bringing new ideas or opinions to kind of strategize against any opponent that we're going to go against.
All right. So as we start to kind of hone in now more on your guys' actual selection, obviously you're really choosing two things, because you're both choosing the team you're going to play in the quarterfinal, but in a less direct way or a hypothetical, depending on what your goals and aspirations are, you're also choosing who might be your semifinal opponent. Did you guys consider your semifinal opponent at all in this decision, or did you purely choose between San Antonio and New York?
I can honestly say that we are playing game by game. We're not trying to look too far ahead. We want to make sure that we are putting ourselves in the best position possible to, get that first win at championships, but also continue on to the next round and so forth. Again, I think ability-wise, we feel confident that we have the ability to play with anybody. So that next round matchup isn't something that we truly considered. But yeah, I mean, you always got to look at the whole bracket and kind of just see what's going on. Every variable possible.
Awesome. So obviously I'm not asking you to divulge your entire strategy and outlook, but when deciding between these two teams, what would you say were maybe some of the major factors that you were kind of deciding on?
I think we just match up really well with the option that we're about to pick. I think it was just play style and some of the things, and watching them play against certain teams, we feel like we can match up really well just overall in beating game, quaffle game. It's just top to bottom, we felt pretty confident going into it.
Awesome. So we'll let you make the pick in 1 second. So the options here are to play San Antonio in a quarterfinal and be on the Boston side of the bracket, or to play New York in a quarterfinal and be on the Austin side of the bracket. Obi, which has Minneapolis selected?
We selected San Antonio.
Awesome. So Minneapolis will play San Antonio in a quarterfinal, which will put Rochester to the other side. They will play New York in a quarterfinal. That'll be on the Austin side of the bracket. Minneapolis will now be on the Boston side of the bracket. Obi, before we let you go, just want to ask you one question. We've talked, you mentioned taking one game at a time. Where were your guys' goals coming into the season? Where are your goals now? And how are you looking at this MLQ championship? And what would be a successful championship for the Monarchs?
Developing a good product, but end of the day, you want to win a championship. And again, it's about building 3 months into the season and coming to a weekend where you're putting everything you've built up on display. We are excited to play in our matchup and hopefully continue to play. Expectations are to win a championship and to compete no matter what. So
awesome. Well, Obi, thanks so much for taking the time. Congratulations on your North Division championship, and best of luck on Saturday in your quarterfinal against San Antonio.
Appreciate it. See you guys later.
Awesome. Alrighty, so the decision has been made. Nick, I'll throw to you first. What do you think about Minneapolis' choice to play San Antonio?
I love it. We talked about this last week a little bit. I think it is a fun matchup on both sides of the ball. I think that we're going to see Cody Narveson and Gracie Johnson especially, but this whole beating depth is going to be on display. But I think we're going to see them sort of force the issue and take it to Daniel Williams at a level that, while he's seen it this year, isn't necessarily what he would expect in a quarterfinal matchup in this. And it's up to San Antonio has looked disjointed at times. We've seen them have trouble scoring without Miguel Esparza, who is not on this roster for this weekend. And I think that it's going to be super interesting to see how they cope with it and how they cope with the fact that Minneapolis is going to throw so many different defensive looks at them, right? Minneapolis is one of the few teams in the league who has consistently run multiple defenses in the span of 4 or 5 possessions throughout this year. And I think it's going to be super interesting to see how this younger San Antonio core copes with that and what they do to sort of fill in the void of their star being out.
And Jack, you also agree with the pick?
Yeah, I think this is the right decision, especially with the news today that Miguel Esparza is not on the tournament roster. I think, last year, a player like Austin Viejo stepped up. Jay Stewart, Mel Kite have looked strong for the Soldados this year, but they just don't have the beating depth that they had last year when they were going up against a deep Indy beating core in the first round and handled them. This is going to be a matchup where they really are going to lean on Cat Hayworth and Daniel Williams. They're going to need minutes from them because the Monarchs can cycle through multiple beating pairs, and they have all season, and I wouldn't expect them to move away from that. And they have their own top line pair in Gracie Johnson and Cody Nardone. Cody Narveson that have been good. So I like the pick.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll get back to the championship bracket a little bit later, but just not to upset my producer, who I think has the playing bracket on the screen right now. We're going to focus on the playing bracket for a while, and then, like I said, we'll get back to it. We're just going to do a little previewing. Obviously, MLQ Replay isn't, focused on the previews. It's focused on the recaps, but we got to do a little bit of it. It is championship week after all. We're going to play a yes and no game. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions. Obviously, your options are yes and no, and you can defend it. I won't make you automatically pick different sides, but you guys can do whatever you want. So starting in the playing bracket, first yes/no question. Washington is beatable by any team in this bracket. Nick, I'll send to you first.
Is that any team as in any of the teams, or there's a team that could beat them?
They're sub 95% to be the upper bracket winner.
No, but there are teams that could beat them.
Okay. Jack?
I think Charlotte could beat them potentially. It's a team that has a lot of familiarity. I think that matters. I'm not necessarily saying that Charlotte and Indy are separated by much. I think that's going to be the real matchup in the play-in bracket. But I think with the number of times that the Aviators have played the Admirals in the past 2 years, anything can happen in a single game.
Yeah. I think just to kind of give full context, because I think we're beating around an important bush here, which is with the roster announcements, Kansas City is bringing an extremely limited roster championship. I think, talking off screen, none of the three of us are super high on that roster's aspirations. Awesome that they're still sending a team. Awesome that they're going to compete even with a limited roster. But I think that's why, when we're talking about, and people are probably looking and being like, this Kansas City team swept San Antonio, and you're saying they can't beat Washington or they're not going to make the championship bracket. That's kind of the context we're taking all of this in. Jack mentioned the Charlotte and the Indianapolis. It's going to go to my next yes/no question. Indianapolis will make the quarterfinals. Yes or no? Nick, you can go first.
I have to say no based on our off-screen conversations and how high I am on Charlotte compared to some people on this cast. But
you can name names, Nick. It's me. It's me.
I would say so. Yeah, I'll say no. I think the -30 you're basically going into the game with against Charlotte, even if you're playing them in that final championship bracket secondary bid option, you're basically starting off down 30 points, and that's a huge deficit to crawl out against this Charlotte team in that beating depth.
Jack, yes or no?
Yeah, well, I'm glad Nick said no because I have to say yes as our North Division correspondent. But I think for real, this is going to be the first time really all season that Indy has been at full strength. Or the tournament roster is looking strong. You know, at when they played Minneapolis, they didn't have Nathan Digman. When they played at MLQ North Division Championship, they were missing almost their entire beater core. Uh, this is going to be the chance for Indy to put the pieces together. And with Riley Andrews, who missed the first series against Detroit, coming into the fold, they have someone that they can turn to as a seeker option, which is where they've really struggled. So it's a tall task. We've talked about it before. It's going to be Riley Andrews and Ryan Davis in those matchups, but I'm excited for it, and I like the chances of the intensity.
Yeah, I'm also high on the intensity's chances. As Jack said, I really think they are putting together a patchwork quilt where they haven't had all of the pieces all at one time. I think Riley Andrews was kind of a revelation for what he could bring to this team while playing on a very limited roster at North Division Championships. And, with more pieces back, with their beating core back. When this team lost to Minneapolis, they did not do so particularly decisively, and they did so without Nathan Digman. And Nathan Digman is their most consistent scorer. And I think a lot of what this playing bracket is going to come down to, minus the Washington of it all, we know Washington is the heavy favorite to just win 2 games and get out of it, is going to be where are your points for sure coming from? Because when you look at a lot of these teams compared to maybe some of the top teams, you don't have that. Not to be a dead horse, but when you talk about Kansas City, we've seen it all season. You know that DME is just going to be good for 40 to 50 points. He's going to get his. I mean, it's a classic concept in basketball. Sometimes a player is going to get his, and it's how you can shut down other things. Diggy will get his. And when you look at some of these other teams, Charlotte, you don't always know where the qualifier points are going to come from game to game. Sometimes Ryan Davis has a cold game. Sometimes Quincy Hildreth has a cold game. And sometimes they all have cold games at the same time. Logan Hartman as well. So that's my concern with Charlotte. That's why I feel better about Indy as the second team out of this bracket. My next yes or no question. New Orleans, who is finally back to the MLQ championship. Will New Orleans stamp their arrival with at least one win? Nick.
Absolutely. 100% guaranteed. Bet the mortgage on it. They are winning a game. There is a dominant beater on this team in Joshua Mansfield, who is with a partner he has played with for years in Sarah Nealing. And honestly, we talked about where are the points coming from. This New Orleans team does not give up points. This New Orleans team is a team that is going to come in with a plan for this Toronto team, and they are going to win the right to play Washington early in the morning.
Jack?
Yeah, for sure. New Orleans is going to win a game. I think they could win 2. I think they have a chance to spring an upset on a team like Indy or Charlotte in the losers bracket section. They're dangerous. Roster looks strong. Dylan DeLee, a newer player, is going to be making his MLQ championship debut. Probably some other names on the roster too, for sure. So I'm excited to see what the Curse can do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this team is a team we're high on, but at the same time, it has been a quiet year for the South Division, and it's going to be interesting to see if this team can, catch the snitches when they need to. Because yes, they can keep people low scoring. They also don't score a lot of points. I think we went over that last week. That while their qualifier points against is very low for a team that's at their record, their qualifier points for is also very low, which means snitch catchers are so important. They only went 4-6-2 on the season in it. I do think they'll be able to beat this Kansas City team if they were to play them in the playing bracket. I think the Toronto game is going to be very interesting. I'm not going to favor them in the way that Nick's going to. I think the Toronto size is something that when they beat, let's say, League City, just they can't compare it to Toronto's athleticism. Sorry, League City can't. New Orleans may or may not be able to, but it's definitely a different animal, and it'll be interesting to see how things play out. Let's jump over now to the championship bracket. Now that we've talked some playing bracket, hopefully Harry Clark will get the cue and move over the championship bracket. My first yes or no question is The South Division, do they put a team in the semifinals, Nick?
I mean, I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say this is the weakest beater core that Austin has put out in years at this point. I mean, they are still dominant in snitch on pitch, but if they end up facing Washington on that first day, this is a different Austin team than the one that we saw last year. The one we saw last year was basically the greatest hits of Austin for the last decade, all coming together because they lost in 2019 and saying we are putting together 1 year of complete and utter domination. This beater core is almost entirely different, and even the quaffle core is almost entirely different. I think you're going to see a much more troubled Austin through this bracket, as well as I think San Antonio against Minneapolis is going to be a tough game for them, or a tough series for San Antonio to pull out winning 3 games. I can see them winning 1 against a Minneapolis team that is almost entirely whole for this weekend. But I think that Minneapolis has a very strong chance to make the semis on their side.
Jack?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a real earthquake if the South did not put a team in the semifinals. I think it's hard to bet against a team that at the end of the day has the GOAT, Augie Monroe. Has Augie Monroe ever lost in the first round or before the semifinals of a major tournament? I can't think of a USQ Cup, an MLQ championship. I think you might see a different Austin team in terms of the way that they play if they are really on the ropes. I think they've looked good at times. They're our only undefeated team, but I think they have another level. They have a break glass in case of emergency option.
Yeah, the answer to your trivia question is US Quidditch Cup 9, but the fact that there is a singular answer to your trivia question speaks to how ridiculous that
this is. This is not the Nick Jablonski bet the mortgage pick, to be clear. This is the weakest the South Division has been heading into a championship. Still incredibly strong, but definitely the weakest. I think this is our best chance in the last 5 to 6 years that we've seen for this to happen.
Yeah, my concern watching Washington this past week is that if Washington and Austin just play a quiet, possession-based, slow-paced game, Austin's going to catch all the snitches in that series, and then Washington's going to need to outplay them by 30 in the quaffle or 40 in the quaffle game every single game. I think that's a tall ask. I think if Washington wants to show another dimension, if they want to get a little bit more up tempo, if they're willing to be a little bit more aggressive, I think we could see Austin wilt a little bit. This isn't the most physical Austin team. This isn't the best beating Austin team, but it is still a very smart team that if Washington plays into their hands, I think we'll have trouble responding. The San Antonio Minneapolis series, I think there's one simple big question, and it's can the beating group, the pairings of Minneapolis handle Daniel Williams? If they can't, I think this could end up looking a lot like last year's Boston quarterfinal for Minneapolis, where their beaters ran all over the pitch and it was fast break after fast break. And the San Antonio players, without Miguel, they're probably not going to be super efficient in the half court, but they have enough athleticism that they can score in transition. But if they can reach parity against Daniel, probably win out against some of the other beaters, then I do think Minneapolis is probably the favorite team. Jack, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, a really good sign for Minneapolis is the name of Matt Bassard on the tournament roster, a player that didn't play at any of the away series against Detroit or MLQ Championship, only played at home against Indy. Looked really good. Can play on ball, off ball, just has a really good sense for the game, a phenomenal athlete. Like, he is potentially a difference maker for the Monarchs against a Soldados team that doesn't have a ton of heavy hitters. So it's just a tournament roster. The rosters will be narrowed to an active roster before championship weekend, but I think Matt Bassard is potentially an X factor for the Monarchs.
I think if you want to talk X factors, I think a healthy Terry Carlson changes their fortunes compared to what they played in that Boston series last year. I don't think that necessarily the results change at all, but I think that if you're basing everything off of what they did last year, losing one of your ball carriers heading into championships, one of your primary ball carriers, is not the way you want to start off your North Championship debut, pushing the envelope, like making your selection. And I think that along the lines of what Jack is saying, like this is a good team, this is a physical team, and I think that that's something that San Antonio is going to have to work to contend with.
All right, next yes or no question, another quarterfinal we haven't talked about yet. Rochester is going to be taking on New York in the battle of the New York State rivalry, formerly all in one division, now in separate divisions. Yes or no, Rochester, who will be sans Bassam Ashkar, according to the official rosters released today, can win a game against New York? Nick first.
Yes. I don't know if it's likely, but this is a team that has proven that they can throw through the 21, whoever the 21 are, and hang with the teams in their division. They didn't bring a full roster to North Championships, obviously, and I think that definitely hurt them. But I think that the fact is that this is a team that is sitting on some very physical players in both the beating and the quaffle game. And New York's not necessarily a team that wants to see that physicality, especially in the beating game. So I'm curious to see if that's the case. I don't think they win the series, but I think taking one game off of a New York team, totally possible.
Jack?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think Rochester, they're going to be missing Bassam Ashkar, but they get some of those pieces back that they didn't have at North Division Championships, particularly Sally Gominiak, who brings so much physicality in the beater game, and Mitch Brown, who is kind of a stabilizing presence on the ball, and just allows players like Alyssa Giroso and Kit Palpour to play in positions that they're more comfortable in. So I think this is going to be a Rochester team that is comfortable and confident heading into the matchup with New York. They held them tight in a couple games last year in the division. I think, and they have a great seeker in Kit Palpour. So I think they could spring an upset for sure.
Yeah, and of course, with all those players returning that you mentioned, you didn't even mention friend of the program. By friend of the program, I mean we're very high on this player, Mitch Vargas, returning as well. I think a key thing. I think you mentioned a couple of the keys for Rochester here. One of them is you have to get Kit Palpour back off ball. He was not as effective on ball at North Division Championships. He was doing it out of necessity, not because they were strategically trying it. But he's been such a dynamic player. He's basically been the Zach Doyle of this team. If you think of how Boston's played offense, Kit Palpour's been doing the same thing for Rochester. So get him off ball, and then be super, super physical in the beating game. This team cannot contend with New York's beating skill. We just watched their beaters, because they were down Gominiak, but overall had most of their beating core at North Division Championship. They got washed by Minneapolis, absolutely washed for 3 straight games. If that happens, if it's just the exact same beating game, it doesn't matter who's coming back in the quaffle game. They are going to get run over. I think the way you even it out is by using the physicality they have. I think you can shake the confidence of some of these New York beaters if you come out and be physical. Make them think twice, make them think the hit's coming. Maybe they throw a second earlier. Maybe that opens up some opportunities. That's what Rochester has to do. The reason why I still don't think all of that is going to be enough, and why my answer is still no, is because I think Tate K is going to eat on Saturday night. I think, I could see Devin maybe not being the kind of player who wants to really, go up against like physicality. Tate K comes from the Southwest. Tate K has been balling since he returned from injury, which is so impressive, given how far he was off. I think he will be the MVP of the series. I think New York will waltz their way to the semifinals, whether that's against Washington or it's against Austin. All right. My last question, because it's the team from this bracket we haven't talked about. I guess I can form it into a yes or no question. If you had to bet, you'd rather have Boston than the field for the MLQ title on Sunday, Nick?
You have to say the field. I'd say the field. Washington's there. Austin is there.
But they're not all there in Boston's eyes. They're all on the other side of the bracket.
I understand that, but getting them to there, one of those teams coming out of the other side is going to be a hard fought battle for this. New York is over there and has taken a game off of this Boston team. This Boston team isn't untouchable. This Boston team is a team that has prided itself on playing fast and playing in transition all this year. They haven't looked like they've had the half-court ideas, except maybe in that New York series. And I'm curious to see if they can sort of pull that together. But if Austin and Washington are theoretically one of those two, or New York are coming out of the other side, I think any of those three can give Boston a fight.
Jack?
I'm taking Boston. I don't think you have to say the field. I think all season long, Boston has looked like the best team in the league. From the first series of the year against the Charlotte Aviators, I think they came out and were focused and keyed in, and they've only improved. I think this is a really talented Boston Forge team. I'm not so concerned about the lack of physicality that Nick is describing. I think they have a bunch of players who can make hits with the best of them in the league right now. And I think, there were times that Tyler Trudeau got to the hoops against Washington, but Boston was conceding some of the space and playing more of a hoop zone at times, and two, there was at least one time where they stuffed him at the hoops, and I think they've shown that they can do that this year, which is something that was totally not the case last year. So I think this is a gritty, tough Boston team, and I think they're the clear favorites.
Yeah, I think it's really, I think the focus is that for a while there, I feel like we were kind of, I wouldn't say, pushing Max Havlin down the rungs of the beating rankings, but we kind of start to stop talking to him a little bit. And I think what we forgot is that it's not that he's the best individual beater. It's that what he and Louis Shu can do on a pitch together is the best thing anybody on the planet can do. And we've seen that this year. They've been absolutely untouchable. When you look at some of these teams you're talking about in championship, who on Austin is going to touch that pair? Who on, San Antonio is going to touch that pair? It's not going to happen. That said, the big question mark, we've talked about a few of the question marks. We talked about the physicality concerns, and we'll see if those bear fruit. I think there are physicality concerns literally across the league if your name's not Rochester, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But is the seeking game, right? And that's what it might come down to at the end of Sunday afternoon. Is Boston either good enough to be up 40 on Austin, or can they find a way to catch two snitches? And, it's been Nick used the word earlier today off camera. It's been a resurgent year for Harry Greenhouse. If Harry Greenhouse could find two catches against Austin to win this team a championship and push Boston back up, I think that would be a storybook ending for the season he's had. All right. That is going to do it. I'm all piped up for MLQ championship. This talk got me all pumped. I feel like I was in a Monday lull this afternoon. I'm like, oh man, is it going to be there? It's going to be awesome. We're so pumped. All three of us will be there. You'll be hearing at least me and Jack. Maybe we'll get Nick's voice on there here and there as we go as well. We have an awesome cast of announcers. We have an awesome schedule of games. So we hope you tune in all weekend. Both pitches 1 and pitches 2 will be running live all weekend. And we hope you check it out, or that you'll be there. Obviously, we've got the tournament on Saturday and Sunday. We've got Take Back the Pitch on Monday. We also have a live podcast, which Nick might know more details on than I. So I'm going to say things and Nick can correct me. It's Friday night. It is at the film.
It is at Mutiny, right around the corner from the Fields, and it's at 6:30 p.m. It will also be broadcast on MLQ Network, but if you are in Howard County, you should definitely come down and see it. It's going to be a lot of fun. You're going to hear Noah Schwartz and Christina K. Packard talking about and setting up the weekend for you. You don't want to miss it.
Yeah, for sure. Then we'll be live all day on Saturday. We'll be live all day on Sunday. Also, Next Gen is happening on Sunday. Super fun way to watch that next generation of players who, so many of them are the faces of the league already, and now the next gen is ready to come up and do it again. Monday, Take Back the Pitch. So much action. We're excited to bring it all to you. Thank you guys for joining me today. Thanks for Obi to coming on and making the decision for Minneapolis. Thanks to Harry Clark, our producer, for putting in the work behind the scenes. We will see you Saturday morning. Take care.